So thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this deliberation and argumentative conversations. I'll run through a quick set of few slides and then go into some details into what Oxfam has been trying to do in terms of, I would say, less of policy making and more of addressing gaps and getting policies implemented, because I've always maintained that there is no dearth of good policies in our country. The big challenge is to get them going. But I have tried to select kind of distinct examples to give a flavor of different levels at which the policy influencing work is done by Oxfam. But before that, some quick kind of a thing of what helps us in framing our work. So basically, before we start or anybody starts a process of engaging with policymakers or implementers, um, we have to be very sure about the issue. So the knowledge and technical rigor is absolutely critical. And then need clarity about why a particular piece of evidence is being collected and how it will help us to address what we want to address. And who is our target audience, whether if it's a report, then who's the reader, if it's a brief. Again, audience is very, very critical, and, it has to be of interest to them. And what is the methodology or mode of presentation to, do this? And the why also has to be very, very clear. Why are we doing this bit of evidence gathering? For what purpose? And is it for designing new policies, to changing existing policy, to addressing implementation gap in existing policy, or to influence a popular narrative? So that clarity is very critical. And also the angle we are adopting in this, specific suggestions, like implementation gaps is usually we offer specific suggestions, offer a damning critique, like I'll be talking about our inequality work. So it's really critiquing and then pushing for some kind of action, or giving a new angle to an old problem, or pushing for a clear agenda. And of course, we need to be clear that whatever we are presenting has to be different. There has to be a value addition instead of another of those reports. And of course, this is very, very clear to everybody, I'm sure. The target audience has to be clear to us, and what they need on this issue, what format they can absorb. Not everybody has the time to absorb a 100-page report. So maybe it's a 4-page brief, or even a PPT, or just a 1-pager. So all that becomes very important about when you keep the audience in mind. The tone of is also important, cannot be a critical tone only. It has to be, even if you're critiquing, are you being solution focused is also very important to engage, especially engaging with the policymakers, and the format in which the evidence is produced. The what will be look at the structure, how we are going to present the evidence, at what level is the analysis is being done, national, district, ward level, depending on the issue we are trying to address. Also, the comparisons that we make, it's you can read the PPT, the slide, but who are we comparing ourselves with? It's like when we do our inequality work, we often compare ourselves with the neighboring countries, with the BRICS nations. When we are talking of, say, effect of pandemic or health inequality, we look at state based data and try to compare. So that's how we structure the evidence. And the presentation format I've already talked about, and infographics and any additional material. We can also think in terms of creating short video clips that we use in social media. And that's what brings me to the third point about dissemination and amplification. So there has to be a clear dissemination plan and a media and social media advocacy plan. The strategies we normally use to maximize influence is to build rapport, obviously, with the target audiences for the message, and identifying champions within the system. So if it is the State Commission for Protection of Child Rights, you identify champions there. If it is a legislation process that's going on, although under FCRA, once a process is on, you can't get involved. But before a process starts, you identify the champions within the system. So if it's new education policy, then identifying the right kind of champions amongst the political parties and the bureaucracy, and, build rapport and explain your kind of points to them. Also amplifying the narrative through media, I've talked about it, and building a supporter base for the message, which we do through building alliances and networks. So, and the challenges that one faces is obviously that eventually decision making, we all know, is political. It's a political exigencies that kind of decide what is decided by the government of the day, and it may not always be evidence based, but we still have to continue to provide evidence and push for those decisions that we would like the government to take. There is always a confirmation bias in messages, and people see and hear what they want to see and hear. The latest example is, for instance, the increasing age of marriage of girls. There's a huge division even within the civil society on the issue, multiple views, but a lot of people would say, no, if you increase the age of marriage, it is all good for the girls. But you start unpacking it, then you can see the other side of the story, but that's a challenge. And the last is, even if you convince the system, so to say, to come to your side, there could be lack of funds. And often, I would say, more than lack of funds, it is often lack of human resources to actually deliver to implement the decisions. So human resources, especially in many states, we find it's a major challenge for implementing even on agreed kind of policies. Finally, how do we define success? Well, if we are able to get a shift in the policy or implementation, that's success. If we are able to get popular support for the shift, that's success. And greater awareness on an issue is success. And if media is covering it, is also a measure of success for us. I think it is important that it becomes part of the popular kind of conversation. So we measure success like that. I will quickly share. I think I will manage to do three, but let us see. There are these four examples I have picked up from our work. So, one is the work we do on inequality. I'm sure many of you would be familiar with the January Davos Week of Action and the Global Inequality Report that comes out every year. That talks about increasing inequality in the world and in countries. What we decided to do about 4 years ago is to start bringing out an India inequality report, because we thought that till this becomes a conversation topic in the Aam Janta, and people need to start understanding this issue instead of just sticking to those billionaires in the global report. An India focused inequality report is required. And that's how we started producing an India inequality report. And what we have realized is that as a result of this past 4 years of work in particular, we have been able to mainstream this issue quite a bit, so much so that, in this year's inequality report has been quoted by several academicians. It's actually, people have started waiting for it. Even some political parties have referred to this report during the budget session. And the chief economic advisor in the economic survey also talked about this difficult choice between growth and inequality. And, our view, of course, is that it's not a difficult choice. And there's increasing evidence globally now that just increase in GDP will not address the major challenges we are facing as countries. We have also tried to bring in the element of not just wealth inequality, but gender and caste and regional inequalities, which are very critical for a complex country like India. So, and we have used multiple strategies to amplify this whole report. There is media level engagement on television and social media and print media. We also have now started going out to vernacular media in Telugu, Gujarati, Odia, and Hindi. And we bring out a short Hindi version also. So all these efforts are to reach out to a wider audience and to generate a narrative at a wider level. The second example I want to talk about is some influencing we managed to do for this project, which is a World Bank funded education project called STARS. Now, this project is essentially a loan where 15% contribution comes from the bank. To cut the long story short, basically what we found An area of concern was that the project was actually trying to push for partnership with non-state actors and non-state actors, including for-profit players in the education sector. And this project is proposed in 6 states, and which would have involved handing over completely the operations and management of government schools to these actors, and outsourcing services and seeking support from management firms and direct benefit transfers in terms of school in the form of school vouchers. We were able to reach out to, firstly, we wrote a letter to the World Bank vice president of the region, and a letter was signed by well-known academicians, the teachers union, and we were able to actually package in a lot of global and national evidence to say this is not going to work. And we are very happy to say that as a result of this, and we used our Oxfam International connections at the World Bank board to also raise a question in their board meeting. And as a result, while the loan was passed, they assured in writing, it came in writing that they will not involve for-profit private sector. I'll quickly share a very important example because it's a more rooted example in the state of Uttar Pradesh, where the Right to Education forum called SCORE has done some excellent on-ground work to influence again the policy implementation of RTE. And one of the things that they have been able to do effectively is to push for implementation of a particular section called 12(1)(c), which guarantees that 25% of the seats in private schools are reserved for children from economically weaker sections, particularly Dalit Muslims and poor children with annual incomes of less than 1 lakh. So what Evidence Score managed to get was that from 2009, when the act came to place, till 2014, not a single such admission had taken place. It was zero enrollment. So this data was there. They also identified a gap in the rules that were formulated by the government, which said that so long as there are seats available in government schools, there is no need to implement Section 12(1)(c). And obviously, no government would ever say that we can't admit children, and no government order had been issued on 12(1)(c). The SCORE got pushed for the issuing of this order. And then they realized that the draft order said 3 lakhs as a cutoff income. Again, it was pushed and brought it down to 1 lakh. Still, there was no action. And then, they actually had to take a legal route where then they widened the network of people, the stakeholders who would be contributing to the formulation of the PIL. And IIM Ahmedabad has an RTE cell that tracks the implementation of 12(1)(c). There were All India Parents Association. We identified 2 champions in the State Commission for Protection of Child Rights. And, a whole lot of people then got their act together, and the PIL was formed, and the High Court instructed for immediate action for implementation of this provision. So from zero enrollment in 2014, it has been brought up to more than 12,000. I think it's 2018 data or 19 data that I have. Thank you very much.